On her 18th birthday, Chloe expected a cake gifts, or at least a hug. She got a single trash bag filled with her clothes and the sound of a deadbolt locking behind her. Her family thought they had completely broken her, but they had no idea her late grandfather's final gift was about to rewrite all of their lives. The rain in Seattle that morning wasn't just a drizzle. It was a torrential downpour that seemed to mock the supposed milestone of turning 18. Chloe stood on the porch of the only home she had ever known, the cold seeping through her thin canvas sneakers, staring at the mahogany front door. Behind it was her father, Richard, who couldn't even look her in the eye, and her stepmother, Brenda, who wore a smile so smug it made Chloe's stomach churn. "You're an adult now, Chloe," Brenda had said just 5 minutes prior, tossing her cheap duffel bag onto the hardwood floor of the foyer. "We've done our duty, but this house is for family, and quite frankly, your attitude has drained us for the last 4 years. It's time you figure out the real world." Her father had stood near the kitchen island, tracing the rim of his coffee mug. Chloe had looked at him, begging silently for him to intervene to be the dad he used to be before her mother passed away. Instead, he simply muttered, "It's for the best, kiddo. You need to learn independence." They hadn't just kicked her out, they had systematically dismantled her safety net. When Chloe walked to the nearest ATM, shivering and soaked to the bone, she inserted her debit card to check her savings. The screen blinked back a balance of $14.32. The joint account she had shared with her father, the account where she had deposited every paycheck from her after-school waitressing job, had been drained. Brenda had convinced him to withdraw the $4,000 Chloe had saved for community college, claiming it as back rent for the years she had lived under her roof. She was 18. She was homeless. She had absolutely nothing. Sitting on a cracked plastic bench at the Greyhound bus terminal, the reality of her situation crushed her chest. She opened the small leather satchel she had managed to grab before Brenda locked the door. Inside were a few Polaroids of her mum, her birth certificate, and a heavy brass key wrapped in a weathered envelope. The envelope was from her grandfather, Aaron Pendleton. Grandpa Aaron was her mother's father. He was an eccentric man, a retired horologist, who spent his days tinkering with antique clocks and rambling about history. Brenda had always hated him, calling him a crazy hoarder, and after Chloe's mother died, her father had cut ties with him completely. When Aaron passed away 6 months ago, Chloe wasn't even allowed to attend the funeral in Maine. But a week after he died, a lawyer had mailed her this envelope with strict instructions not to open it until her 18th birthday. With trembling fingers, she broke the wax seal. A thick piece of parchment slid out, written in Grandpa Aaron's shaky but elegant cursive. "My dearest Chloe, if you are reading this, you have reached the age of majority, and knowing Richard's new wife, I suspect you have been shown the door. Do not weep for the loss of their shelter. My girl, they know the price of everything and the value of absolutely nothing. I have left the estate in Oakvale in your name. It is not much to look at, and the town believes I was just an old fool collecting junk. But you and I know better. When you have nowhere else to go, take the brass key and go home. Look past the dust. I have left you an insurance policy in the walls of the past. With all my love, Grandpa." A spark of defiance ignited in her chest. Brenda thought she had left Chloe with nothing to her name, but she was wrong. Chloe used 12 of her $14 to buy a standby ticket on a bus heading east. It was a grueling 3-day journey across the country, fueled by vending machine crackers and sheer unadulterated spite. She didn't know what Grandpa Aaron's insurance policy was, but she knew she had to find it. She was going to Oakvale, Maine, Oakvale was a town that time forgot nestled against the rugged Maine coastline. When Chloe finally walked up the cracked pavement of Sycamore Drive, the salty sea breeze bit at her cheeks. The exhaustion in her bones faded, replaced by a sinking feeling in her gut as she finally laid eyes on Grandpa Aaron's house. Brenda hadn't been entirely wrong when she called it a mess. The two-story Victorian house was suffocating under thick, overgrown ivy. Several shutters hung off their hinges, and the wraparound porch sagged dangerously in the middle. But the true gut punch wasn't the dilapidated state of the home. It was the neon orange piece of paper stapled directly to the front door. Notice of foreclosure and pending public auction. She ripped the paper off the wood, her eyes scanning the harsh legal jargon. The property taxes hadn't been paid in 3 years. The county was demanding $18,450 by the end of the month, which was exactly 9 days away. If the debt wasn't settled, the house would be auctioned off to the highest bidder, and it was scheduled for immediate demolition. Panic threatened to overwhelm her. She slid the heavy brass key into the rusted lock. It required a hard jiggle and a shove with her shoulder, but the door finally gave way, groaning in protest. The inside of the house smelled of old paper lemon oil and dust. Sheets covered the furniture like ghosts in the dim light. She walked through the hallway, her footsteps echoing off the hardwood. Everywhere she looked, there were clocks. Grandfather clocks, mantel clocks, cuckoo clocks, all silent, their pendulums frozen in time. "Aaron," a gravelly voice suddenly called out from the front porch. Chloe spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Standing in the open doorway was an older man wearing a tweed flat cap and a thick fisherman's sweater. He looked surprised to see her, his eyes widening as he took in her rain-dampened clothes and defensive posture. "Who are you?" she demanded, instinctively grabbing a heavy brass candlestick from a nearby side table. The man raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Easy there, lass. I'm Thomas. Thomas Gable. I live 2 houses down." I saw the door open and thought, well, I don't know what I thought. Aaron's been gone for 6 months. He squinted at her, his weathered face softening. "You must be Chloe. You've got your mother's eyes." She slowly lowered the candlestick. "You knew my grandfather." "Knew him. I played chess with that stubborn old mule every Tuesday for 20 years. Thomas said, stepping inside and gently closing the door behind him. "He talked about you all the time. Said you were the only one in the family with a head on your shoulders." Thomas's eyes drifted to the crumpled orange notice still clutched in her left hand. He sighed a heavy, sorrowful sound. "I see you found the county's welcome gift." "I don't understand," she whispered, fighting back tears. "Grandpa left me this house, but I don't have $18,000. I don't even have $18. Why would he send me here just to lose it?" Thomas shook his head, pulling off his cap. "Aaron paid his taxes, Chloe. Always did. But when he got sick, he gave power of attorney to your father to handle his affairs. Your father, or rather that wife of his, stopped paying the property taxes. They let it default on purpose." The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. Brenda. She had known about the house. She had known Chloe would inherit it when she turned 18, and she had deliberately sabotaged it, so she would inherit a crushing debt instead. "There's more," Thomas continued, his voice dropping to a low hum. "There's a real estate developer sniffing around Oakvale, a ruthless guy named Greg Mitchell. He wants this entire block to build luxury condos. He's the one who tipped off the county to fast-track the auction. Rumor has it, Mitchell cut a private deal with someone in your family. If the house goes to auction, Mitchell buys it for pennies, demolishes it, and your stepmother gets a kickback under the table." Her blood boiled. They hadn't just kicked her out. They had sold her inheritance out from under her before she even knew it existed. "I won't let them have it," she said, her voice eerily calm despite the storm raging inside her. She pulled out Grandpa Aaron's letter and showed it to Thomas. "He told me he left an insurance policy, something in the walls of the past. I need to find it before next Friday, Thomas, or I really will have nothing." Thomas read the letter, a slow smile spreading across his wrinkled face. Aaron always was a dramatic one. If he hid something valuable, it's not going to be under a mattress. He was a master horologist, Chloe. He built puzzle boxes and hidden compartments for fun. They began their search in Aaron's study, a room lined floor to ceiling with books and clock parts. Hours blurred into the night as they checked behind every bookshelf, knocked on every wooden panel, and rummaged through endless drawers of gears and springs. The dust coated her hands and face, but she refused to stop. By 2 a.m., Thomas was dozing in a leather armchair, and Chloe was sitting on the floor staring blankly at the massive, intricately carved grandfather clock that dominated the far wall of the study. It was a beautiful piece, crafted from dark mahogany, but unlike the other clocks in the house, it wasn't dead. It was ticking, though the hands were stuck at a very specific, strange time, 11:14. She frowned, standing up and walking toward it. Why would a master clockmaker leave a clock running with stuck hands? She stared at the numbers. 11:14. November 14th. Her birthday. Her breath caught in her throat. She reached out her fingers, trembling as she touched the glass casing protecting the clock face. She remembered Grandpa Aaron showing her how to set the time when she was just 7 years old. "You must respect the gears, Chloe," he had said. "They only reveal their secrets when you move them with purpose." She didn't move the hands forward. Instead, she carefully pushed the minute hand backward, rewinding time. She moved it to the exact time she was born, a detail Aaron had always found fascinating, because it was the exact same minute her grandmother had passed away decades prior. 4:08. As the minute hand clicked into place over the 8, a loud, heavy mechanical clack echoed through the silent room. Thomas jolted awake with a gasp. "What was that?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. Before her eyes, the entire massive mahogany clock shifted forward about an inch. The heavy wooden paneling on the wall behind it groaned. She wedged her fingers into the gap between the clock and the wall, and with a hard pull, the entire section of the bookshelf and clock swung outward on a massive set of hidden iron hinges. A draft of stale, freezing air blew into the study. Behind the clock wasn't just a safe. It was a narrow, winding set of stone stairs leading down into complete darkness. Grandpa Aaron hadn't just left her an inheritance. He had left her a labyrinth. "Well, I'll be damned," Thomas whispered, shining his flashlight into the abyss. "Shall we go down, Chloe?" She tightened her grip on her grandfather's brass key. "Let's go." The stone steps were treacherous, slick with decades of cold condensation and the heavy weight of hidden history. Thomas took the lead, the narrow, piercing beam of his heavy maglite slicing through the suffocating darkness. Chloe followed right on his heels, her canvas sneakers slipping on the damp stone. She clutched her grandfather's weathered letter to her chest like a physical shield against the freezing air. The atmosphere in the stairwell shifted dramatically with every downward step. The familiar scent of old paper and dust faded, replaced by the sharp, distinct and metallic tang of machine oil, ozone, and undisturbed time. At the bottom of the 60-foot descent, the stone corridor abruptly ended. They stood face to face with a solid steel door. It wasn't just a heavy basement door. It was a genuine bank vault, complete with an engraved brass manufacturer's plate from the Mosler Safe Company and a massive, gleaming rotary combination dial. Thomas let out a low whistle, shining his flashlight over the polished metal surface. Well, Chloe, it looks like that's the end of the line. Aaron was brilliant, but he was also paranoid. Even he couldn't have expected an 18-year-old to magically guess a safe combination. It could be absolutely any string of numbers. She stepped forward, the chill of the underground room seeping into her bones. She reached out and ran her trembling fingers over the cold, heavy dial. You must respect the gears, Chloe. They only reveal their secrets when you move them with purpose. Grandpa Aaron's voice echoed in her memory. He had already used the exact minute of her birth to unlock the grandfather clock upstairs. What else connected them? What was a moment so pivotal that he would entrust his greatest secret to it? She looked down at the letter in her hand, scanning the faded cursive ink under the harsh glare of Thomas's flashlight. Thomas. Shine the light on the date at the very top of the letter. She instructed, her voice echoing off the stone walls. He obliged the beam, highlighting the top right corner of the parchment. The letter was dated August 14th, 1982. That makes no sense, Thomas muttered, scratching his bearded chin. Aaron died just 6 months ago. He wrote this recently. Why date it decades in the past? Because August 14th, 1982 isn't just a random day. She whispered, a surge of adrenaline cutting through her exhaustion. That's the day he opened his very first clock shop in Boston. He used to tell me stories about it, before Brenda made my dad cut him off. He said it was the proudest day of his life, right up until the day my mother was born. She grabbed the heavy metal dial, her hands steadying. She spun it to the right landing on the number 8. She reversed the spin to the left, stopping precisely at 14. Finally, she turned it back to the right, letting it click into place at 82. A heavy, reverberating, metallic thud echoed from within the thick steel door. Thomas pushed against the handle, and the massive slab swung open on perfectly oiled hinges, revealing a room that completely defied reality. As Thomas reached inside and flipped a heavy industrial wall switch, rows of bright fluorescent lights hummed to life. They were standing on the threshold of a pristine, climate-controlled, state-of-the-art horology workshop. It was the complete antithesis of the decaying abandoned house sitting above them. The workspace was meticulously organized, featuring high-end equipment she couldn't even name, precision Swiss lathes, bolted to heavy wooden benches, gleaming and ready for use. Ultrasonic cleaning tanks used for stripping decades of grime off delicate microscopic gears. Archival drawers, velvet-lined pullouts, filled with thousands of tiny sorted golden cogs, springs and sapphire bearings. Horological blueprints, framed schematics of centuries-old mechanisms lining the back wall. But it was what sat in the absolute center of the room that made the breath completely leave her lungs. Resting on a velvet-draped pedestal under a thick glass dome was a device of breathtaking, unimaginable beauty. It was an astronomical clock, but unlike anything she had ever laid eyes on. It was constructed entirely of solid gold, deep blue lapis lazuli, and clusters of raw diamonds that perfectly mapped the constellations of the night sky. The intricate gears inside were fully visible, spinning in a silent, flawless, eternal ballet. Sweet Mother of Mercy. Thomas breathed out his legs, carrying him slowly toward the pedestal, as if he were approaching a holy altar. Chloe, do you have any idea what this is? No, she admitted, utterly mesmerized by the rotating golden sun at the center of the mechanism. I've only ever read about it in niche historical horology journals. Thomas whispered, his hands hovering over the glass dome, terrified to touch it. It's the Breguet celestial sphere. It was commissioned in 1814 for European royalty, but it was widely believed to be completely destroyed during the Blitz bombings of London in World War II. The rumor in the antique world was that a private collector had salvaged it in hundreds of shattered pieces. Aaron didn't just collect junk, Chloe. He was a master restorer for the most elite quiet circles of high antiquities. He spent his entire life secretly rebuilding a masterpiece. She stared at the golden sphere, her mind desperately struggling to comprehend the reality of the situation. Thomas, how much is something like this actually worth? At a private auction. Thomas let out a breathless, disbelieving chuckle. $4, maybe $5 million. Easily. Perhaps more, given its history. The number hit her like a physical blow. $5 million. She had been sitting shivering at a Greyhound bus terminal with exactly $14.32 to her name less than a week ago. But Grandpa Orrin's genius wasn't just in the treasure he left behind. Resting on the primary workbench next to the pedestal was a thick, black, leather-bound ledger. A yellow sticky note was attached to the cover, bearing her grandfather's distinct handwriting for the wolves at the door. She opened the heavy ledger, and the true extent of Orrin's foresight revealed itself. He had known exactly what Brenda and her father were capable of, and he had hired a top-tier private investigator in his final fading months. The ledger was a meticulously curated bomb of undeniable evidence. Contents of the Pendleton ledger document, type subject, matter, key details, wire transfer receipt, Mitchell development to Brenda Pendleton, $50,000 marked as consulting fee. Private email, printout, Brenda and Greg Mitchell, coordinating the suppression of tax notices. Cash withdrawal log, Greg Mitchell, $15,000 cash pulled from corporate account. Photographic evidence. Mitchell and Dale Higgins. Mitchell handing a thick envelope to the county tax assessor. It was a flawless, airtight paper trail proving that her stepmother had accepted a massive bribe from Greg Mitchell. In exchange, Brenda had deliberately hidden the property tax notices and manipulated her father into ignoring Aaron's estate, practically guaranteeing the house would fall into a rapid foreclosure. Worse, the ledger contained definitive proof that Mitchell had been aggressively bribing the county tax assessor, Dale Higgins, to fast-track the public auction and illegally bypass standard notification laws. They thought they were dealing with a helpless, broken 18-year-old girl. They had no idea she was currently holding the power to utterly destroy their lives. "Thomas," she said, her voice dropping an octave, hardening into absolute steel. "I need to make a phone call to Sotheby's auction house in New York. And immediately after that, I need to call the sheriff." The morning of the 9th day was bright and cloudless, a stark contrast to the storm Chloe had arrived in. The foreclosure auction was scheduled for noon at the county courthouse, but she knew Mitchell and Brenda wouldn't wait. They wanted to gloat. They wanted to witness their victory firsthand. At exactly 10 a.m., a sleek black Mercedes pulled into the overgrown driveway of Sycamore Drive. Chloe was sitting on the sagging front porch, sipping a cup of black tea, waiting for them. Greg Mitchell stepped out first, wearing an expensive tailored suit that looked ridiculous in the rustic Maine setting. But it was the passenger who made her blood boil. Brenda stepped out of the car, adjusting her designer sunglasses. She had actually flown across the country just to watch Chloe lose her inheritance. "Well, well, well," Brenda sneered, walking up the cracked pavement. "If it isn't the little runaway. I thought I told you to figure out the real world, Chloe. Squatting in a condemned building isn't exactly a career plan." Mitchell smirked, pulling a manila folder from his briefcase. "You need to vacate the premises, kid. The county takes possession of this property in exactly 2 hours. I'm doing a final walkthrough before my demolition crew arrives tomorrow morning." She didn't stand up. She just took another sip of her tea. "You're awfully confident for a man who doesn't own the deed. Yet, Mr. Mitchell." "It's a formality," Mitchell scoffed, stepping onto the porch and towering over her. The back taxes are 18 grand. I know for a fact you don't have a dime. Now get off the porch before I call the local police for trespassing. You don't need to call them, a deep voice boomed from the doorway behind her. I'm already here. The color drained from Mitchell's face as Sheriff Miller stepped out of the house, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a tall, sophisticated man in a charcoal suit holding a silver briefcase. "Sheriff," Mitchell stammered, taking a step back. "What is this? The auction isn't until noon." "There isn't going to be an auction, Greg," Sheriff Miller said coldly. He stepped to the side, allowing the man in the suit to approach. "Mr. Mitchell, Mrs. Brenda," Chloe said, finally standing up. She gestured to the man in the suit. "Allow me to introduce Jonathan Croft, Senior Appraiser for Sotheby's auction house in New York. He flew in on a red-eye last night." Jonathan adjusted his glasses and offered a polite, practiced smile. "It's a pleasure. Though my business here is already concluded, I have authenticated a piece of historical horology recovered from the estate. Based on its provenance, Sotheby's has agreed to an immediate cash advance of $500,000 against its projected auction value of $5.2 million. Jonathan reached into his breast pocket and handed a certified cashier's check to Sheriff Miller. "The county's property taxes of $18,450 have been paid in full, plus a penalty fee. The deed remains in the sole possession of Miss Chloe Pendleton." Brenda's jaw practically unhinged. Her designer sunglasses slipped down the bridge of her nose. $5 million. That's impossible. That crazy old man had nothing but junk." She lunged toward Chloe, her face twisting in pure greed. "Chloe, honey, you know that money belongs to the family. Your father is the rightful heir." "Stop right there, Brenda." Sheriff Miller barked, stepping between them. He pulled a thick, leather-bound ledger from under his arm. It was Grandpa Aaron's book. "Miss Pendleton provided me with some very interesting reading material this morning." The sheriff continued, his eyes locked onto Mitchell. "It details a $50,000 wire transfer from an offshore account owned by Mitchell Development directly to your personal bank account, Brenda. It also details several cash payments made to Dale Higgins at the tax office to illegally accelerate foreclosure notices." Mitchell's expensive suit suddenly looked a size too small. He looked around wildly, like a rat trapped in a corner. "This is a setup. That book is a forgery. We'll let the FBI determine that," Sheriff Miller said, unclipping his handcuffs. "Wire fraud across state lines is a federal offense. Greg Mitchell, Brenda Pendleton, you are both under arrest for conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, bribery, and extortion." Watching Brenda get handcuffed was the most profound poetry Chloe had ever witnessed. She screamed, she cried, she threatened to sue everyone in the state of Maine. As the deputies loaded her into the back of a squad cruiser, she locked eyes with Chloe through the window. There was no smugness left, only terror and the crushing realization that she had orchestrated her own downfall. Chloe's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was her father. Brenda must have texted him before the cuffs went on. She stared at his name on the screen for a long moment, remembering how he had looked away while she was thrown out into the rain. She pressed decline, blocked the number, and dropped the phone back into her pocket. He had made his choice, and she had made hers. A week later, the Breguet Celestial Sphere was safely transported to New York via armored truck. Chloe kept the house in Oakvale. With the advance from the auction house, she hired local contractors to restore the Victorian home to its former glory. She fixed the sagging porch, stripped the ivy, and painted the exterior a vibrant, defiant ocean blue. Thomas Gable became her project manager, happily barking orders at roofers while sipping lemonade on the lawn. She wasn't the scared, broke 18-year-old girl standing on the porch in the rain anymore. Grandpa Aaron had given her more than a fortune. He had given her her power back. She walked into the hallway, the smell of fresh lemon oil filling the air, and listened to the steady, comforting ticking of a dozen grandfather clocks, all finally keeping the perfect time. Did Chloe's ultimate revenge against her wicked stepmother leave you speechless? Sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in the darkest times, and karma never misses a beat. If you loved this story of resilience and justice, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life drama stories. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload.